Hey everybody, it's Rob. Frontline Mindset with National Fire Radio. Very excited today. I've got a friend of mine who I met a couple years back when we did an on tap event up in Buffalo. We had a good time. I got to stop by his firehouse and kind of connect with him. And I reached out to him to see if he could come on today, and he agreed. So I don't know what that's about. Maybe he's lacking. No, but seriously, folks, I got Captain Zach Polvino from the Snyder Fire Department. He's going to talk with us today about a couple things. Zach, thank you for coming on the podcast for me, brother. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. No problem. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, man. So let's jump into it. Talk to me about your origin story.
hmm
What drew the 16-year-old Zach into the Snyder Fire Department, and how'd that all start there?
Yeah, so good question because I think I've tried to think about that. I think I part of it was my family moved to the fire district, to the area we live in. Better schools, kind of stuff like that. And they had a program. We still do have the program for 16-year-olds to join. But I think even before that, right? I think like or most little boys growing up, you love playing with trucks, love playing with fire trucks. That, and then every once in a while you'd catch the reruns. My dad would watch the reruns of Emergency or something like that on TV, and so it kind of looked fun, looked cool, wanted to do that. So so kind of got me, I think, down that path. Kind of always wanting to be part of it, be part of something, do something. Always fascinated with big trucks, and then specifically fire engines and fire trucks, stuff like that.
Yeah, I think it's so important that we do like events in the community, especially like touch a truck events and stuff like that, because it's
hmm
really like that's our connection to the fire service. I know for me, I was always in awe that my dad got on this monstrous fire engine and zoomed off to alarms and stuff. So it's a big thing there. A lot of our
Yeah,
stories come from that.
yeah, absolutely. And I think I see it now with my son and my daughter, both my children. But um, I didn't grow up with anybody in the fire service,
Hmm.
so I came to it, kind of completely, somewhat on my own. Friends growing up, one of my good friends growing up, his dad was in the department. His brother is currently our chief. So I've known them for a long time, and so that that was another tie to it. Again, that community tie. But yeah, the touch a truck things, like I see it with like I said, with my kids. Taking them to a couple of them over in the summertime, and they just want to see the big stuff, and it's shiny, and it's cool. You can touch stuff, and so yeah, absolutely. I think there's always those connections that are important.
So you've been with the Snyder Fire Department for a couple of years now. You started out at six, and how old are you now?
So I'm 36
Okay.
now. I would have 20 years. I did leave for a brief period of time, like volunteers do, right?
Yeah.
Things change, life changes. But yeah, so I'm just hovering around, I think, 18 years officially of service, um, from 2005 to 2013, and then 2015 to present.
How has the department played a role in shaping your leadership style and your approach to the fire service?
I think it's a big influence, because I've seen things from over that time, right? Good things, bad things. We all experienced it different ways. But even just the experiences of how we deal with responses today versus when we did when I first joined, right? And changes in um, changes in safety, changes in culture, changes in just the amount of people showing up, right, to both the scene, and or to the station, or there at drill night, all those things. So it's easier, I think, in some ways when you have a large, robust group that's there to kind of handle the situation. And then I think, you have to be a little bit more on your toes as a leader when you have a smaller group, right? And you have to kind of do a lot more. Um, certainly it's, you're not sitting back as much and observing. You might have to be that working boss kind of, especially on a limited manpower response, but or even just day-to-day operations.
Can you kind of dive into that a little bit on the working boss thing? Because
Hmm.
I think that, it's easy for us to take a book on leadership and fire company officers, I don't want to say the fire company officers handbook, but like some kind of leadership S
Hmm.
type manual, and they say like, hey man, if you're a boss, you can't be doing that, but you've got
Yeah.
it. Like, but I also think that sometimes the books are authored by departments that have manpower. They're manpower heavy. They don't have a manpower issue.
Right.
What's it like to you to be a working boss?
So, a great example of that, we actually did this last night. So last Wednesday nights are our regular drill nights, and we put together a little drill inside our firehouse, moving in the truck bay, moving charged hand lines. And it was, put a little obstacle course together with some cones, go around the apparatus, types of things, right? And the groups were, two groups, group of four with an officer. So if you had five total, and it sounds, like, hey, that's an ideal, that would be great if I rolled out the door with, four in the back, myself and a driver, or even, three in the back and
Hmm.
myself and, you know, but once you start breaking that up, obviously, right, you start going around bends, you start going around all these things, right? And right, engine company, you got to drop somebody back to keep the corner, keep that line moving. Um, that officer position kind of falls back into, do they become now the backup person on the line because they don't want to leave the nozzleman? So where they float, where they fall into that position. Um, but also, they may be, if you have even, if you did have the manpower, they may be still floating back and forth, just making sure that everybody is in line and everybody's good. That I have somebody at that pinch point move in line, or I have somebody there. Same thing, not even, with overhaul and all the other tasks that we do, right? Um, it's one thing to stand there with the thermal and look and go, oh yeah, hook there, but it's another thing when, it's just me and somebody else, and we have to go, okay, yeah, let's grab that spot, and do the job that we have to do.
Yeah.
So I think that's where you're right, where that kind of comes in with that idea that the boss can't just be the textbook, you know, stand here, do this, supervise that type of thing.
Right. And also the mindset has to be developed from, especially like you just give an example about like being with just, one other member and having to hook something. Like that other member's got to be thinking about, hey, like I'm I'm going to be grabbing an extra hook for the officer.
Hmm.
Like, I'm going to be grabbing an extra tool. I like kind of getting the members to think that 3 to 5 steps ahead, because that's really going to come in pivotal. And the other thing that you said that kind of made me think about this is experience, right? Like, if you're an officer and you have an experienced nozzleman, you're probably a little bit more comfortable, dropping back to get that
Hmm.
bend and
Hmm.
hiking some lineup than you are with, somebody who's just got out of IFO and just got turned over, to be interior. Like how does that balance play in your head?
Yeah, I think that's, again, another great point. One of the things that we hit on last night, with that is that, hey, we're, part of the nature of the volunteer side is we're not riding with the same crew every shift, right? We're not, you know, going to, we're not big cities, so we're not going to, fires every day, every other shift, stuff like that. So, these are our opportunities to work with everybody within the company and work with everybody that's coming to drill. But then, yeah, also, if you have somebody that's a little bit more experienced, and I may have that longer term relationship with just from over time, I may be more comfortable with them. Yeah, okay, you do what you got to do, and let me, go around and grab you some line, right? Because we tell
Mhm.
everybody IFO, BFO, IFO, and some of the other courses, like, well, we never want to leave the nozzleman alone, but we know that the reality is sometimes that happens, right? And we talk about that in some of our drills, saying like, hey, if you're gonna push this hallway and you have this room going and you can't make the room, but you're by yourself, put yourself against the wall with that line, use the wall as your backup, right?
Right.
Knock it down, use your reach, penetration of your line. um, but you don't want to put that necessarily into the mind of a brand new member so that they go off and do some cowboy stuff that maybe they're not ready for.
Right.
So it's that balance, right? Yeah, it's that how do you keep things, moving at the same rate of, keeping everybody safe.
And I just, as a point for everybody listening, Zach and I are talking about BFO and IFO, and it's just because New York State can't figure out how to just to do a firefighter one program, so they've broken it up into basic exterior firefighting operations and then interior fire operations. So they've broken the firefighter one curriculum. They've kind of split it in somewhat of a half. If the half, was a weird glass that's not really half full but half empty but half full. I don't know. That's a good
Yeah,
way to describe it. Um,
yeah,
and just to kind of go on point too, like that's the purpose of these drills too, is that you're preloading that brain of the new member in this so that they're getting that, like they're experiencing this for the first time, isn't going to be in the actual fight. They're in this controlled environment where they're like, oh yeah, my officer may have to dip back, but he's going to come back to me. He's not going to let me sit up here. So
yeah.
that's yeah.
And we told everybody last night too, right, that we had one of our other captains and his father, who is now coming back through the ranks a little bit, volunteered to step up as a lieutenant, to fill some spots. He's a great resource as a past assistant chief. He's a county fire instructor, so he kind of took the lead here, and which was great because when he was a captain, I learned from him. So
Hmm.
it's kind of fun, but and he said it, at the beginning of drill, like, look, this may look like a simple basic drill, but, even for the experienced guys that were there, right, like this is, if we can't do the fundamentals, right, like what are we really doing? We got to be able to just get that line stretched off the rig to the door, in the door, and flowing, right? Forget about all the other stuff. Let's just, this is the basic, and it's a great review for everybody, no matter, where you're at.
Well, that leads me into my next question. You're passionate about leadership and core competencies, especially for engine company work. So why does this matter so much to you?
Um, well, when I take my glasses off to put my mask on, I can't see real well, so I don't like being on roofs,
Okay.
you know.
Is
But
it all right?
it's that's part of it. I haven't gotten the glasses insert into my mask yet. I gotta get on that.
Me
But
neither. It's been 20 years,
yeah,
but
yeah,
21.
yeah. I've been like the same. Every time I go to the eye doctor, I'm like, oh yeah, I gotta go get my prescription updated and send it over here, and I just forget. Um, so I think everybody finds their niche. One of the other things that my group of guys that I hang with, we always talk about, everybody kind of finds their niche in the fire service. Some people really love certain things, like I love engines. It just, I don't know, it seems like a natural thing for me. I like the thrill of it. It's nothing better than, being the nozzleman, but now it's being the officer with the nozzleman. But I also fell in love with the all the theory behind it, the applying some math, which I was never great at in school. But now it's applied, so I enjoy it. So doing some of the friction loss calculations and gallons per minute, and evaluating, what kind of nozzle and size nozzle and different variables and all that type of stuff. It doesn't seem like a trivial exercise like a math test used to be. Now I can put something behind it, so I'm vested into it. That kind of stuff, really kind of, for some reason, just kind of clicked with me, and it just kind of became my thing, and that's been one of my driving forces as a lieutenant. Now as a captain, really doing a lot of the nozzle stuff, the not just the actual tactics of putting out the fire, but then understanding the science behind it. So
Right. And like I know, so I can tell everybody that I've been to Snyder. Like you guys have some awesome apparatus, but like one of the things that I remember is the engines were set up for work, and they were kind of set up in a similar fashion. Whereas I've seen other parts of the state and the country, there's like an attack engine and a
Hmm.
supply engine, but everything was ready to go.
Yep.
And it seems like you guys have done a really good job in understanding your nozzle package with your hose package as far as getting all of that stuff squared away. Do you have any like input, like, because I mean, as you're going into the weeds of the nerdy side of
Yeah.
the engine, which I think is great, like that's the other side of it, right?
Right. Yeah. No. So I can't take credit for the engines being set up the way they are because that's been a tradition, for us for a long time. We have three engines. Other than some small minor variances, they are set up identically, right? They all happen to be the same make and model, so that helps. But the hose loads, they're all the same hose loads. There's a couple minor variances between a couple of the engines just based on what they would generally do as second do or third do. Um, and that's just really with how we split a bed of 2.5, right? On engine, our first out engine, it's two beds of 500 feet, and on the other two engines, it's 1,000 feet.
Hmm.
Right, it's just single. So it's just those are some of the minor differences. A couple tools carried differently on our one of our engines carries a portable set of portable AMCUS, portable generator so we can power jaws and a cutter. So if our heavy rescue is out or our heavy rescue is on another call, or even on the same accident and we have that much extrication, we have that equipment. So those are some of the minor differences, but from the hose side of things, we actually just went through this year earlier, replacing our hose, our attack lines. So part of that was I was involved with. We kind of had an idea that we were going to stick with Mercedes, and with
Right
the
on.
Kraken. We were really happy with it over the last 12, 15 years that we had it. It was just time for an update, make sure everything was all on the same page. So we did test it. We did do some testing with vendors, and it was really just kind of reaffirming what we had known. But that was a lot of what I was doing was middle of November with the pitot gauge, checking the pressures, getting
Yeah.
that nice cold spray of water in my face.
Knowing your flow, man. Dave Quick would be very excited about this. What nozzle are you guys using on your attack lines?
So all of our attack lines, we use smooth bore. We use a 15/16 tip on our inch and three-quarter lines. The 2.5s are inch and an eighth. We do have a combination nozzle that is on our front line bumper lay. That's a Elkhart Chief nozzle. We can spin it off to a 15/16, but it's
Hmm.
150 at 75, 150 GPM at 75 PSI, and that's really for the dumpster fires, car fires type of thing.
Yeah.
But our first, both of our cross lays, 200 feet, nominal size inch and three-quarter with that 15/16 tip. It puts out a lot of fire.
Yeah, for sure, and especially with that Kraken EXO. I mean, it's a good hose. I'm running the same thing at work. So Mercedes doesn't sponsor the channel, but if they want to,
Right,
they're more than
right.
happy.
Yep.
Um, and what gets you fired up when you're like, I mean, because like the engine stuff, like is there a dream fire that you have that you like, or is it just that getting a couple rooms off and just doing that nozzle work if you have the opportunity, or have you really embraced the role as an engine company captain and being that guy that's slightly behind the nozzleman?
Yeah, I mean, right. Like I think everybody, I still want to be on the nozzle. I still want that, but I think, it's part of the job, right? You got to embrace kind of where you're at. If I'm the, if I'm riding in the front seat for the day or, for that call, I embrace that role of having to be, where I need to be, whether it's being the backup, if I happen to be riding with a few extra and I have somebody that's a dedicated backup. Um, Generally for us, I'll be next to the nozzleman with the camera pointing out what's going on. I may crawl up ahead just slightly to see, what's going on. We've had some over the last year and a half or so. We've had some decent fires, residential. Um, lot of it extinguished with inch and three-quarter lines. Some of it got a little bit more than we anticipated with some fire conditions, but again, made a lot of solid pushes with it. We had a attached garage, single-story house, attached garage, and the initial. I wasn't on the engine. I was in one of our command vehicles for my squad week, so I had that. So getting there, getting geared up and everything, and the initial plan when the engine rolled up was the 2.5 was going to come off, go to the garage. The inch and three-quarter was going to make its way into the house. Things got flipped. No big deal. We made it work. The bulk of the fire load was in the garage, and the engine crew. By the time I got in there and with them and the engine crew, they were knocking out fire like it was no one's business. And that 2.5 got in the house and really just kind of protected the house from more fire involvement, obviously smoke involvement, and smoke damage. But the other nice thing was there was a hydrant right in front of the house. So our general SOP is only one hand line charged on tank water, on 500 gallons of tank water. Especially then if you're going to use a 2.5, right, that's going to be even quicker. But the nice thing was as they rolled up, that was part of what I was doing, was making sure that the engine crew, they had water, helping the chauffeur get hooked up right away before I made my way in. So I also knew that we had a bunch of other officers there doing, so kind of fell into an operational role of helping with the outside stuff.
Yeah, man. For young officers who are stepping into leadership roles for the first time, what's some like sage advice that you would have for them coming into it? Because I think there's a lot of elections happen, right? Some
Yeah.
people are coming into this in the volunteer service, especially. They've and I'm not trying to poke fun at it, but they've won the contest and now they've got heavy as the crown. They have the responsibility. What do you got to say on that? Like, give me some lines here.
I think some of it is you just have to be yourself. Don't try to be somebody else. You can't try to do what other people necessarily do. Not to say that you shouldn't have people that you look up to, because obviously I think we all do, and we all follow somebody in some way. But I can't be you, right? Like I can't come down, visit you, ride whatever, and then try to do the exact same thing, right, in my place, because it may not work. But I can come down, I can observe, and I can see like, oh, hey, Rob did this. I really liked how he talked to his crews about this, that, pulled everybody aside after a fire and did an after action like right there, hot washed right there. Maybe that's something I'll take back. So I think it's trying to not reinvent who you are as a person. Trying to find those strengths, things that you are good at. The other part of that is, I think looking for those opportunities to improve, right? It's that self-reflection, going like, okay, hey, you know what? Here I was a little shaky. Maybe I need to kind of dig deeper into this. Whether it's an actual skill competency or it's the leadership competency, because I think there is a difference between the two. I think in the volunteer world we see it, and it happens. I mean, it happens in again, not right, wrong, and different, but I think sometimes we look at somebody who is, oh, they're that guy goes to all the calls, that guy's a great nozzleman, that guy's a great whatever, he'll make a great officer, and that doesn't necessarily always translate.
Right.
That leadership skill doesn't just come with, you put on a different color helmet.
Yeah, and it has to be taught, right? I think that I like the idea of leadership competency because there's a lot of things, and I even see it, in my own career where, we for the longest time, even here it was you got promoted, it was congratulations, and the keys were tossed at you, and now you had access to different things, you had additional responsibilities, but there was never that, bringing it up from behind of like, hey, this is some of the things you need to do, and when you're talking about being yourself, one of the things that I think of is like you got promoted, like either like the people who are in the membership of your company believe in who you are, or in the career side, or if it's, I've seen some volunteer agencies that promote with
Hmm.
an actual promotion board, like they see something in you, so there's no reason to quote unquote change yourself, right? Like you have to be responsible, you have to understand those responsibilities of being in an officer's position, but like to that's such I really enjoy that whole like be yourself thing, because I think that's it just it lit off a light bulb in my head and made me think of a couple different things.
Yeah.
um when it comes to um new officers and stuff like that, what's a is there a training drill or a leadership lesson that you think every firefighter should experience at least at one point in their life?
Hmm. I think, I think part of it is everybody should experience failure on the training ground once or twice as a leader, whether you're running the drill or you're part of that drill, you're running a station or whatever. Um, and I think it's okay. I think, we for so long, and for so long for myself, I was so hell bent on having to be perfect all the time, that I didn't allow myself to fail. But I think, that's where you learn. And I think, it's okay to do that on the drill ground, because that's where we can talk about it and we can go, okay, hang on, let's take a time out. You know, this happened. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about what led up to it. Let's adjust it. And as a new officer, you may have thought like, hey, that's what I should be doing. And hey, that's your mindset, that's the mindset. Um, I'm not saying it's right or wrong, because you only know what you know. But then being able to work with the more seasoned and senior officers to be able to walk through that and get that education to try to make that better decision the next time. Um, that's why I think, I've certainly had drills go kind of sideways, things that didn't go as planned, whether it was because of a call came in during the middle of it and that, throws off your timing, or, somebody didn't, you weren't on the same page. And then I look at it, and I think I used to look at it when I was younger and say like, how come they didn't know this? And now I'm looking at it going, how, how come I didn't communicate that as well as I should have? Or what could I have done differently to communicate that?
Hold on one second here, I
Hmm.
just want to, as we're doing this, the guys are outside. I'm starting to hear the taps of forcible entry training happening. So, but that's all
Nice.
right. That adds some realism to our
Yeah.
podcast here. Um, what are some of the, like shifting gears in this? Like you're a volunteer department.
Hmm.
You're you have to have some recruitment strategies. Like, what is it that you're doing in Snyder that you feel is working, or that have gone well, or maybe flopped in a way?
Yeah. So we started looking at a number of years ago, kind of the looking around after a drill one night going, where is everybody? Like, just, doesn't seem like there's a lot of people here. Um, we then kind of looked at it and said, okay, you know what? Instead of just sitting around the table and griping about it, let's actually just go do something.
Right.
Let's just, you know what? Don't even bother asking for permission. We're just going to ask for forgiveness after the fact, because we're just going to go out and start recruiting. We'll figure it out. And we started doing that by talking to some of our younger members, like, hey, what made you join? Why do you want to join? Why do you want to be a firefighter? Like, what brought you in? What keeps you here? Talk to some of the, folks that are kind of my um, age group, or have been in my, you know, roughly the same amount of years, and say like, okay, well, what's kept you? Like, what are things that you like? Um, what are some things you don't like? What are some things you want to change? Took that information. One of the things that came out of it was, and it's not a new model by any stretch of the imagination, right? But we kind of came up with our version of duty staffing on the volunteer side. So instead of having to maintain a call percentage for the year, an annual percentage of calls you made, looking at that, saying, okay, well, what does that equate to in terms of hours? And if you staff the firehouse for this number of hours, that equates to being a member in good standing. And in New York State, you get all your LoSAP and all that kind of stuff. But again, not a new model, right? This was stuff that was going on in other parts of the country for a long time.
But
Um,
I would say, just to jump in real quick, it's
yeah.
a new model for areas of New York State. Maybe not up by you, but like that's outside the box thinking. I mean, just the fact that you went and talked to younger members and was finding out, because like this is a recruitment question, but it's kind of a trap, and you didn't fall for it, because the other part of it is retention, right? Like we can recruit anybody, but how do we retain the people? And just coming
Yeah.
back and saying what keeps you here, or what's kept you here, and things you like and things you don't like, and is there something we can change, and coming up with a duty staffing idea, because I think that's one of the things, right? Like I'm a member in Milton and Ulster County, and like the pager goes off, and man, I'm like, I want to go, but there's that. It's just like I'm like any other volunteer that's out there with a, you're trying to weigh, what's happening. All right, it's automatic fire alarm. Can I
hmm
how pissed is the wife going to be when I say
hmm
I'll be right back, and then this
Yep.
turns into something that's a little bit more in depth
Yep.
or whatever else. But like that, having that duty staff there, like that's awesome. Sorry to jump in. It's just
No, no,
that.
absolutely. So I think, we're working on that, and it's still a continued work in progress with that program. I think there's still some things that we want to do. There's things that I want to do with it and expand it. Um, but yeah, it's just, it's how do you to both recruit, but then, use it as a recruitment tool, but then how do you use it as a retention tool, right? Because are there members that would be on the bubble of not being able to maintain their membership? They want to be there, but they just can't, because of time constraints. Okay, well, now they can plan a little bit better. I
Right.
can plan that I'm going to be here these days, these hours. Part of that also included, we looked at our residency. Um, we said, if you're an on-call member, like myself, pager goes off. If I'm not at work, or if I'm not doing something with the kids, I get up and go. You got to live in the fire district. Kind of makes sense, and we've expanded that boundary just a little bit,
Right.
within reason. For our duty staff, our duty shift, we've expanded within a radius of around the Buffalo area, and basically said you can live in these areas, because when you're coming in to do your hours, you are basically punching in. It's like going to a job, just you're volunteering to staff for those hours. So realistically, obviously we want people kind of close, because it makes sense that a fire comes in, everybody wants to go. Doesn't matter if you're punched in on duty shift or not, everybody can still show up. But people that have other requirements, life requirements, that force them to live outside of our district, that may be an opportunity for them to still be able to provide that service. If they want to stay with with Snyder, they want to stay with us because they grew up there, they been a long-term member, their friends are there, they don't want to start over somewhere else, you know so
Well, and I think that's the other thing too. Like you may have to, you know, just like honest, there might be a bad reputation in the place that you're going to, and may not be something that's savable, or just dangerous for you. You got to make those choices. I
hmm
mean, and if you have something that works, like you want to keep it going. Like why
hmm
turn somebody away?
right, right, absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that we have to look at as a volunteer service is, how do we can't keep relying on, well, this is the way we've always done it, right? This is the way we've always done it, and we're always going to do it that way. That doesn't work anymore. um, we have to evolve. We have to get to a point where we understand that things change, life changes. um, I think it's better to be ahead of the change than to have the change forced upon you, right?
100%. Yeah.
There's a lot of talk with the on both sides of it, with proposed changes with OSHA and everything. And I think, again, getting out ahead of it as best you can makes it a heck of a lot easier than that proverbial somebody coming in and telling you you have to change to do this now.
hmm
So
I think of like just as far as like being in front of the change, one of the things and I don't want to say I dislike the idea, but like sometimes people will be just quick to say like, well, we got to hire career staff. Well, like maybe it's something that we need to hire like a consultant or an administrative assistant to
Hmm.
help us with like the training or like and I know my fire like Milton hired a mechanic for
Hmm.
apparatus downtime issues because there's a problem with EBT techs and stuff like that. So they saw an issue in something and
Hmm.
they did something that to me for a small volunteer department is outside the box, and that's bringing in a mechanic to work on your apparatus to handle those issues because of depending on the dealership and everything else, like there's just a lot of external parts that are going
Hmm.
uh, problems with that. So that's yeah. I mean, being in front of the issue first is huge, and I applaud you for it because that's good stuff.
Yeah, I think on the paid side, right? Like obviously, my department went paid. I'd love to get a paycheck. Um, my my response to it always is yeah, but at the same time, like where's the funding going to come from?
Right.
We we do, I'm fortunate. My district is a pretty affluent place, so we have the resources that we need, right? I'm not, we are not um, strapped for it from the tax base, right? Our fire district is has a pretty reasonable tax rate, and we collect the money that we need, and we're able to spend it. Um, but I think there comes to a certain point where people say like, well, how much are you going to keep raising my taxes before the value I get, right? And I get it. I think from a fireman's mindset, we think, the paid option is, well, this will be so much better for the taxpayers. They'll see that it's so much better for them. Will they? I don't know. I mean, until your house is on fire or until you need the fire department, do the regular people actually think about it? Or do they just think they're there if I need them? I call 911, they show up. So,
Yeah, yeah, and it's always that value proposition of trying to figure out like because I know like one of our former chiefs, he was a lot of things, but one of the things he was spot on about was um, property that we protected, like the value of the properties that we're responding to and how much of that assessed value
hmm.
we protected off the tax rolls, and it's just
Hmm.
it's a different way of breaking up the slice, and whatnot. But like, yeah, you got to have that conversation out there. It's important. So, um, on your day job,
Hmm.
like you're kind of deep in the administrative side of EMS. How has that changed the way you see the fire service and EMS working
Yeah.
together? Is there something with the perspective on that?
So yeah, so I just started, not just started, but I started here in August of last year. Prior to that, my day job was I was a project manager at a bank. So this opportunity popped up, jumped on it. It kind of gave me an opportunity to focus in a little bit more on stuff that I enjoy doing, helping people first and foremost, but also kind of applying um, my project management skill set to passion being emergency services. So yeah, I think there's what I have seen personally, I think there's still a divide between fire and EMS. Even though a lot of departments, like mine included, we run EMS calls. The majority of our calls are EMS calls. Um, I think there's still a divide even within EMS between advanced level providers, paramedics, advanced EMTs, and ALS services versus, BLS and BLSFRs, like my agency, like, right, we don't have an ambulance, so we don't transport, but we still do a lot of EMS at the scene. Um, so I think that divide is there. I think things are coming together a little bit more than they have in recent years because you're starting to see some more of the statewide organizations and councils and associations, work together on some bill packages on the legislative side in the state. Um, with trying to make EMS essential, trying to change some of the billing procedures, some of the cost recuperation for EMS and for transport, right? So I think that side of it has kind of come together. I think we're seeing a little bit more, again, as we kind of evolve with how we think about things, and bringing in kind of this idea that one kind of exists, or one doesn't exist without the other anymore,
Right. Yeah.
right? There's really not a lot of places that are just fire, or while there still are places that are solely EMS, I think there's a lot of places that are at least I just kind of have a feeling anecdotally that there's a lot of places that are combination. And to what level, that obviously depends on the local need, whether they're transporting or not. But I think we're starting to see that come together. I think one of the things that I'm doing, again, work-wise, trying to bring some of my experience from the fire side and saying, like, hey, I've got some courses that I've taken, right? I've taken the instructor series, with principles of instruction, instructor 1, instructor 2, and how can we leverage that on the EMS side of things, right?
Yeah.
Getting into becoming lab instructor, certified lab instructor, getting into, moving up, into a CIC role for the MT courses. But then also saying, like, what are some of the stuff that we do really well at teaching in fire officer, right? Like in fire officer 1, we do a really good job of teaching you how to be an officer, but we're lacking that on the EMS side. So how can we bring that over?
Yeah, that's actually a pretty, because I mean, and even on the personnel issues, I think you're more likely to see personnel issues on the EMS side because of just the nature of the beast, especially if you're a transporting agency, you're working with somebody in that
Hmm.
ambulance. So yeah, that's a great point. And you hit on something about making a push to make EMS an essential service in New York.
Hmm.
Why is that critical, and why should an average firefighter essentially give a shit about that? Because that's a big
Yeah,
deal.
it is a big deal. I think it's incredibly important because we look at, I think, again, anecdotally, we can say I think the public thinks that they call 911 and an ambulance, if they need an ambulance, is going to show up. In many cases, that's true, but not in all, right?
Right.
There is no requirement that a city or town provide that service. Um, and I think, like, that's important for the general public. If it were me, for my family, I want that. I want them, no matter where I am in the state, if I call 911 because something happened, I want, somebody to show up. Um, so that's part of it, but I think the other part of it is part of the overall bill package that helps with again the finance side of it, right? Because everything has a cost.
Mm-hmm.
How things are being able to bill, being able to bill for things that got passed last year, the TIP and TAD, treatment in place, and transport to alternate destinations. That's going to be big for agencies, um, to be able to charge for a diabetic call where they're showing up, and an ALS crew is starting a line, and getting a diabetic patient brought back up on their glucose levels. Unless they transported, before they couldn't bill for that. Now, once this legislation, went through last year, was signed by the governor last year. Now it's just working through the becoming policies, and policy statements, and all that kind of stuff. Once that goes through, right, that'll give agencies the ability to bill for that time and bill for those resources.
And I
Um,
just want to
yeah.
interrupt you real quick, Zach. For those who are listening, New York State is, it's the Empire State for a reason. And one of the things we couldn't do for the longest time, I worked for a fire district, so we weren't allowed to bill for ambulance service. We have two BLS ambulances, and it just had recently in the last couple of years passed, and our fire district has started revenue cost recovery, and it's been
Hmm.
a windfall for the district because now we're able to recoup costs and recover costs related to the ambulance service. And that's one of the things Zach's hitting on here, is that there were certain things that people were able to provide for, and they weren't able to recover costs. So it was all on the arm of the taxpayer when like normally, your insurance company and stuff like that would be able to, handle those recovery of the cost from that end. So it's important just to note that because I know somebody might be in Maryland and like this is a county run system, like we do that, that's
Right,
and
right.
we're kind of missing some of those crucial pieces of
Yeah.
legislation because everything's down to a home rule on the local level sometimes for
Yep.
us. So
Yep. So, but yeah, I think it's important, again, from the essential side of things to be able to become essential in the eyes. Becomes, I think it gives validation. Again, I think it's been a long, go back to what I said at the beginning, watching Emergency, right? And,
yeah,
I think you could even see it like, go back and watch, EMS has evolved and everything from even from, watch shows like MASH, right? Depicted the Korean War, right? And now then how you've evolved through the 60s and 70s,
right,
Emergency comes out. That's, showing the 1970s, LA County, but my own department, we had paramedics at a volunteer agency before Emergency came out. If you watch the new show that's streaming on Max, um, HBO or whatever, or Max or whatever they call it now, The Pit. Like they just did a whole thing about Freedom House in Pittsburgh and how that evolved, and that was the early or late '60s, excuse me, late '60s, where they were doing paramedics, right? And that
right,
was being the first paramedic program in the country. And it seems like it's far away, long ago, but it's not, right? Like
right.
I think
Especially if
about it, it's been my
we just think of that mindset of the fire service, right? Ben Franklin is one of our founders in American fire service, right? That's like Revolutionary War time.
yeah.
So like really, we in the grand scheme of things, EMS is, and it's still in its infancy of this.
I was gonna say, like, if you look at, the timelines of it, like, that's all, 1967 through today, that's all happened in my parents' lifetime.
Right,
Like, they're not that old. I mean, like, that's pretty wild. And then obviously the evolution and the evolving science and what we do and how we treat patients, that's changed, right? From days of, didn't wear gloves to now we don't, touch a patient without gloves. You can't, go to EMT school without doing the BSI scene
yep.
safe, jazz hands.
And I mean, I just had something that was on the tip of my tongue and it just slipped off. But oh, sorry, that's what it is. Like the when it comes to this, like we're facing an EMS crisis in New York State. I think nationally that's not any
Hmm.
better. Recruitment and retention in EMS is brutal right now.
Hmm.
What's one realistic change you think could help keep providers from burning out and leaving?
Yeah. So the state came out with a report end of last year, workforce study. It was an update. They did one in 2019. This one came out in 2024. I think it looked through end of 2022 data. Um, some of the highlights, right? It was not a pretty picture, right?
Right.
EMS is struggling, and I think the reality is the fire side we're struggling as well, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's again we're in the same boat.
Yep.
Um, I think one of the things that to me that stuck out on the EMS side in that workforce report is again leadership, right? Like you have to have agency leadership and you have to have quality leadership. It can't just be, hey, this guy's a really good paramedic, he gets his IVs on one try all the time, never has a problem intubating. He should be the boss. Okay, what does one
Right.
have again? What does one have to do with the other? So I think I think of the fire service, we've learned it with like Fire Officer One and some of those courses that are out there that help develop people as an officer, moving into the officer ranks. EMS, I think, doesn't have that yet. Um, you know, at the state vital signs conference in October of last year, that was one of the big things that was talked about was we don't have that ability, and unless you're a member of a company or a district that also does fire, like if you're an EMS provider, how do you get into state fire classes? How do you get into fire officer one? If you're an ambulance corps, right? You don't have a state fire number.
Yeah.
Um, for you and me, like it's a little different, right? We can do that because we can send our EMS if we have, people that want to do that into those courses because we're a fire company or fire district.
Yeah. And I also think too, like one thing that's a stark difference between fire and EMS sometimes, and this is like I hope that with the drive to make them EMS an essential service in New York State, that we start seeing uh, a pull away from commercial agencies leading the charge to getting municipalities, because like we don't have that deep connection to people who retired from EMS like we do in the fire service. There's no
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
storytelling that happens from people being like, "Hey, I remember, Spencer Wood or Bruce
Mm-hmm.
Heath or, this guy and that guy," because they either work for that commercial service until they can't work anymore, or they get to a point where they hit their career and they're like, "You know what? I don't want to do this anymore. I'm going to become a nurse, or
Right.
I'm going to go move on or like I'm going to test out for the fire department because they're not sitting on a street corner.
Right.
This is their third vent transport. And I mean, there's this like, and I'm not saying the commercial services are bad in this aspect because they're a business that has to like by their nature they have
Mm-hmm.
to be profitable to stay in business, or else it's a failed system, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
even more of a failure. So, but that's one of the things that I hope happens is that there is going to be, um, I'm like that there is going to be a more professional shift, if you will, in some of this, because I think that's one of the parts that's missing out of that is we don't have that pride and tradition in EMS that we have in the fire service. I don't see it on a wide scale,
Yeah.
in a culture, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you're absolutely spot on with that, like the culture of it. Like look I'll be the first one to tell you, I'd much rather have a hose line in my hand, right? But the bigger picture is, 70 something percent of our calls in my department are EMS. So we also have to be good at doing EMS.
Hmm.
And the way that I look at it too is that it's not always, um, yeah, it's not always fun, it's not always glamorous, but A, what if that call is for my wife or my children? B, what if that call is for one of my firefighters, right, from my own company, right? Whether they're at home or they're at a drill or they're at a fire or they're at a call, something happens. Like we're going to be the first ones there just by nature of, if it happens at the firehouse on, a drill night, it happens on at the tower for, drill evolution, or happens at a fire. Like we're going to be the ones there providing care and service. What we got to be really good at that too.
Yeah, and when it counts like twofold. I mean, I think it's very easy for us to become complacent with you know, the 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 BLS runs that are like
Hmm.
our frequent flyers and stuff. We should. I mean, really, how we haven't adopted some kind of a frequent flyer program from the airlines with miles and points, free turkey sandwiches or something, I don't know,
Yeah.
whatever. But it gets to you. But like when you're on, like, and I've always appreciated my EMS training because like when something does go wrong, like people are freaking out and you're just able to handle it,
Yep.
like to the best of your ability, obviously. But yeah, it's it's definitely it's important, you
Hmm.
know. And I also think that there's a little bit more of a personal. Well, I know there's a little bit more of a personal connection when we're interacting with somebody on an emergency medical scene, uh, versus like that. I mean, we're pretty barbaric when it comes to fighting fires. Like,
Yeah.
we're taking windows, we're dragging a hose line through somebody's house, we're spraying water
Yeah. Oh yeah.
everywhere. Like, and it has to be that way. Like, it's
Hmm.
a barbaric act, essentially. Like, you're stopping fire.
Hmm.
Um, but like, man, you can really make that difference because I think that I look back at my career after 21 years, and there's a lot of hands that I've held and a lot of pats on the shoulders or hugs that have happened
Yeah.
that have meant more to especially our senior population than anything else. And I can't. How do you put that into words, right?
Right. Yeah, I agree. I think there's so much that happens, with the EMS side that we maybe don't notice, but it doesn't go it's very noticed by the public,
Hmm.
right? And that interaction, and I think that, kind of goes to building the community goodwill, of your agency, right? they may think about like, hey, those guys, I had a really rough patch there, and those guys, girls, they came in and they took care of me. They did this, they did that. They cleaned up, made sure that, there wasn't anything left, after, that's the kind of good stuff that I think you want, any agency wants, right? Any chief officer wants, district leader wants for their agency.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah, man. Zach, I want to dive in if you're
hmm
comfortable with this about mental health and ADHD
hmm
advocacy, because I think it's something that when I've been a kind of a camp champion for it, but myself, but you've been pretty open about living with ADHD, depression, anxiety, PTSD. Like, how did you first realize mental health was something that you needed to take seriously?
yeah, so it started a number of years ago, before my daughter was born, my first child, and it was something at the urging of my wife and a few others that, I go see somebody for anger issues, right? And just try to get through, and try to deal with that. Um, I had been diagnosed in my 20s with ADHD, and I really kind of didn't do anything with that diagnosis, because I thought at the time, well, I'm out of college. Like, what good is this going to do me? Like, I can't go back and change my grades. I can't go back and pay attention to math in fourth grade. Like, kind of is what it is.
I'm right there with you, brother. Yeah.
Right? So I kind of let it go and I really didn't do anything with it. And then, flash forward to a couple of years ago, actually last year, um, it kind of got to a point where, I was seeing a therapist, but we thought, kind of doing some stuff, but it really wasn't making that big of a difference. And after, I don't even know what the fight was over. It was probably over something dumb, but it was my wife and I were in kind of a heated argument, and later kind of realized what we were arguing about wasn't what we were arguing about. Like there was that was just, from other stuff going on in my life. And when she told me that, my daughter was afraid of me, when I was like that, that's what really kind of broke me. Um, just kind of took took a lot out of me to sit there and just kind of go reflect a lot, on my life. Because it was a lot of the same stuff that I realized that then I was replicating of kind of a childhood that I grew up with. The
Mhm.
yelling, kind of dealing with a lot of those issues. So, and I had said, I didn't want to replicate that. I didn't want that to be her life and my son's life. So that pushed me really kind of forward even further into, um, I need to do something and I need to do something now. And maybe there is something to this, ADHD, and diving deeper into understanding that the anxiety and the depression come with ADHD for some of us, right?
Yeah.
Not for everybody. I mean, I know it kind of presents differently for everybody, but for me, it was not a result of something else. It was a result of having ADHD and that constant thinking and, being up at the middle of the night, just grinding over everything, and not being able to kind of process things. So kind of, accepting that and understanding that, getting over my fear of taking medication
Mhm.
for it, because I was afraid that if I got on meds, it was going to change me, right? And it was gonna take away, um, it was going to kind of dull my edge a little bit, kind of what I thought, made me really good, was going to dull me, and I think proved to be false. I think looking back now, I wasn't as good as I thought I was, right? And I think understanding that, all that fear, um, and anxiety, that anxiety that drove that fear and then depression, didn't do anybody any service, right? As an officer, as a firefighter, as a husband, as a father, right? It didn't, so being able to then proactively deal with that, going forward. So,
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, because I know, and a lot of what you said, had it hit a lot of points for me as well, because my journey with ADHD, and I'm figuring out now about my depression and my anger, and I'm looking back at my childhood, and it's like just funny when you said that I can't go back in fourth grade and learn
Hmm.
math, and I think of like what I get angry about now is that like I know what I know, but we didn't know what we didn't know back then,
Yeah.
you know?
And and it's because I've had these conversations with my parents, and my mom is always, I'm so sorry we didn't. I'm like, it's okay, mom. Like, I'm not mad. I'm not mad. I can't go back 30 years, right? Like, it's not for me now. It's about understanding who I am now,
Hmm.
and working on that, and then also looking at my children and going, okay, I understand this now, um, and there's a high probability that children, of somebody with ADHD will develop it. And understanding that, okay, what do I have to look out for now so that I can get them some of the help, that they may need, right? Or the services in school that they may need. Because I don't want, my daughter loves going to kindergarten right now. She absolutely loves it, right? And I remember loving school, but then I remember hating school.
Right.
And I don't want her to get to that point. I think it's kind of funny because it now kind of clicks back to something, at the very beginning, like what got me into it. I think at 16 years old, unknowingly, the fire department did give me that structure that I was looking for. Um, Not that I was a bad kid, but I think, at 16 years old, you kind of have that tipping point, right? Of which path do you go down? And I don't know the path that I would have gone down had I not joined the fire department and been in high school, right?
Yeah.
I joined the summer between my sophomore year and junior year of high school, and I think those last 2 years of high school made it a lot better, being in the fire department, because it gave me something to do. Um, you
Yeah,
know,
I became a C and D student on the basis that like I was trying to do the minimum so I could continue to go to the fire department, so I didn't get on academic probation anymore.
hmm
Like it was and I like I don't know, like it's just yeah, it's interesting that like I said I'm very much that resonates with me as far as like because I was it brings back memories of like yeah, like if I didn't have the Youngsville Fire Department to keep me in line and provide that structure, and then also that motivation to, and
hmm
the ambulance corps as well, like to because if I wasn't doing, if my grades weren't up, I wasn't riding, it was
right,
so
yeah.
yeah.
And I think then, the other fascinating part of it for me is discovering, what draws those of us with ADHD to emergency services, fire, EMS,
Yeah.
police, military service, all that kind of stuff. Like what draws us to that? Um, and I think that's kind of interesting. I think there's a lot there, and I think there's probably a lot more that we don't know yet. And I'm kind of interested to see, long term, where does that research kind of, where does that study go?
Yeah, I know one of the things that I told a friend of mine who was trying to understand, and I said that, like, I've become a very good firefighter because when somebody's holding a gun to your head, it's very easy to concentrate on just getting the gun away from your head. You're not going to be like, oh, I wonder what's on sale at ShopRite this week? Has Price Chopper got anything? What's Wegmans doing? Like, no, like you are focused on that gun barrel and
Hmm.
getting it away from your head. And
Hmm.
the fire service to me was that gun.
Hmm.
Like handling an emergency was like a very super in depth. I could be hyperactive about it and hyper vigilant to it and all those things, right? And just focus on those. Like, all right, and I knew
Yep.
these things. Um, and and that's just for me. That's not to say it's a broad stroke. And I always laugh because I look back at my own history of like struggling in school and stuff, and you know the I was a Boy Scout, but I never got my Eagle Scout, and people were like, "Oh, I can't believe you didn't do that." And I'm like, "But you know what? Like nobody gave me credit for becoming an EMT at 18, having a
Right.
cardiac arrest save, like any of the other accolades that had happened from emergency services." So it's just, yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. I I I I think it's funny. Like you look back and go, like where did where how did I get to where I am,
Yeah,
right? Um, I think back and go like, yeah, it's, I've gone through different, different paths in life, and I think that all kind of informs who you are, obviously as a person, but also, from a leadership side, it informs who you are. Um, I think sometimes, leadership is, can come from outside areas, right? It always doesn't have to be the same, the same type of voice from the same industry all over and over. So I think, that's that curiosity that comes with ADHD kind of helps with like, hey, I wonder if this is going on over here. Like, for me, one of the big things is like I love sports, right? And I'm not a great athlete by any stretch of the imagination, but I love watching it. And what fascinates me is watching like the behind the scenes stuff, right? Like when they do like Hard Knocks or any of those type programs, and kind of seeing what the coaches say in the locker
Yes.
rooms, right?
Yeah.
And kind of going like, okay, I'm, how can I adapt that to being a leader,
Right.
right? Whether, whatever rank, title, position you are, like how do you use that to motivate people? How do you use that to kind of do different things? And so I don't know. I can, obviously only speak from my own experience. I don't know if that's, ADHD or if that's, what it is, but like I think that curiosity is there because of it.
Yeah. 100%. What's been one of the challenges about navigating mental health as a firefighter and EMS professional that you've kind of experienced or have come in contact with?
I think there's still as much great work has been done. I think there is still a lot of work to go to change some of the mindset and the stigma around it. I think there's still a lot of people that are providers, whether firemen, EMS, that are afraid to say something because they're afraid that they might lose then their position or their job because of it. And with that goes their identity. And I think that's contributing to a lot of pain and suffering. That was something that I dealt with was, this idea like if I tell my friends that I'm not okay, like are they going to tell me that I can't be a captain anymore?
Right.
Like, and how crazy is that to think like that's what I was concerned about and not like I have two kids at home that I should be worried about like if I'm doing right by them. Like that
Yeah.
was that consumption like, and I think that still happens, and it and I get it, like it's so hard. It's the hardest thing you got to do,
Right.
right, to get through that. I'm not, I certainly don't want to minimize it for anybody. It's just, but like you want to help. I want to help people get through that, but I also understand that people, individuals have to get through it kind of on their own in a way. Like I can't force somebody to
Right.
go see a therapist or to talk to somebody. I can be there for them though. Like if they call me and say, "Hey man, like I need this," or like, "Can you give me a ride to this place because I'm afraid to go?" Yeah, I'll do that. But I can't be your therapist because I'm not that role. But
Right.
I will strongly advocate for you
Yeah.
and that you should do this.
That is a tremendous point to make, and I look at it as like you don't have to walk the path alone. Like I'm here for you. Like, and it's and I how do I I think it's one of those things where um you make a decision for yourself, and that's the hard part, but you're like you've hit your bottom line. You've hit,
Mhm.
alcoholics will talk about rock bottom,
Mhm.
right? But it's like deciding, making that decision, like you said you had that point where your daughter's afraid of you and you didn't want that, and that kick, like that moment that kicks off, and once you're there, like just because I tell people, I trust us, like we've walked the path, like it's better on the other side of this, but like I said, you can't force them into it. You can't be the
Mhm.
therapist for them, but man, you can certainly, and that is a great takeaway. You can go with them. You can go with them to the appointment. You'll sit out in the waiting room or in the car, like so that they don't have to be scared. Like you're there. That safety blanket, so to speak, and that's what we should be doing as firefighters anyway, is supporting our brothers
Right.
and sisters or EMS professionals or anything else in emergency services.
Yeah, and I think, it's society, right, in general. It's understanding that, it's a whatever, the mental side of it, right, isn't any less serious than somebody has heart disease,
Right.
right? Somebody says, "Hey, I got heart disease." Like, okay, like, well, I'll call the best cardiologist I know. Like, I'll get you, I'll drive you. Like, I'll drive you to the hospital. But I think that we say like I think it's twofold. 'Cause I think we're afraid to say like, "Hey, I've got some kind of mental things going on," because we don't want people to look at us funny. But then I think people are afraid also when you say something because they don't want to feel like they're looking at you funny, right? They kind of know what I mean. Like
Yeah.
there's
It's
still
judgment of
there's yeah,
sorts.
exactly. Like, and it's
Right.
just like, so that's, I think, some of the work that kind of just still has to keep going on and going forward.
Yeah. 100%. Is there something fire and EMS leaders can do better when it comes to supporting members who are struggling?
I think the biggest thing is understanding that we cannot fix it as a firefighter, as a EMT, as a leader. I think we by and large are type A personalities. We're the fixers, right? We love being in those situations where, somebody's house is on fire. I'm going to fix it by putting it out. Somebody's in a car accident, can't get out. I'm going to fix it by popping that door. You know, um, but we can't, like you said, somebody comes to me and says like, "Hey man, I'm struggling here." Like, I will do everything I can to assist you, but I can't alleviate that problem. But I think as leaders, we have to understand that and listen more than we talk. Be there, be that sounding board. Just be there to for somebody to vent, and not try to offer a million suggestions, right? Just if somebody says like, "Hey, I just need to vent," let them vent, right? And let them go off, let them get it out of their system, talk about it, but they don't need me going, "Well, did you try this? Well, did you try that?" Because chances are they probably did, or chances are they don't really want to hear that. They just want that emotional release. And I think sometimes as leaders, we have to allow that to happen.
Yeah, I agree. Is there something that you would say to a young firefighter or EMT or somebody who's new in the profession that feels like they're drowning, but they don't know how to ask for help?
I think the biggest thing I would say is, you're not alone. Other people have felt that way and probably still do feel that way, regardless of how long they've been in or what position they hold or what color their helmet is. Um, I think the other thing is to say like, look, it's okay to say that you need help, and it's okay to say that you need someone to talk to, and maybe that's just the first step. Um, and I think the other part of it is, again, I think some of it is it's okay to say like, if you've had your fill, if you've reached a point, I don't think we can look at somebody and say, well, oh well, they only did 5 years and I'm going on 20, like they just couldn't handle it. No, that's the wrong thing. I think to say is like, okay, hey, look at, they reached their level. They
Right.
if they've reached that point, and it's gonna, that bucket is gonna start tipping over, then they know where they're at.
Yeah, man. I've never even looked at it that way, and I'm coming up on to like thinking of it that way as like, because I was like, oh, they're gonna have to carry me out of here, and now I'm like very much becoming acutely aware of like my, I don't want to say my end, but like the like what this version of Rob Ridley, this identity,
Hmm.
like when it's, well, it's not my identity. I'm Rob Ridley's my identity, right? Not Rob Ridley firefighter, but like it's eventually going to, like, my retirement is going to happen so I can enjoy other things in life, so I can go to Paris
Yeah.
and piss off some Parisians or something. But like that's the things that I want to do, and yeah,
Yeah, I think I think I'm probably better at giving that advice than following it myself, because I look at it and go, well, yeah, I'm 36, but sometimes I don't feel like I'm 36. I don't feel like it's been almost 20 years. Um, so I feel like at some point, like that'll catch up to me, and get there. But I think, that's yeah, that's a good way to look at things. That there is life outside of the fire department, which I didn't know existed for a long time.
Right.
You know.
It's easy to get sucked into it too. So speaking of that, you go to work, the firehouse, the family. How do you recharge and keep your own mindset in check with all this?
So I had to adjust, for myself and my family, the number of calls I would go on. Right, I still want to be actively involved, and I still want to be going to a lot, and I still do go to a lot of calls. But I had to, kind of set some limits and boundaries for myself. Um, and my wife knows that, and she, bless her heart, because she knows that if it's a fire, like then I kind of have to go, right? And she said all the time, she's like, she goes like, if I weren't married to you, weren't associated with the fire department in some way, and my house are on fire, like I'd want everybody to be there. So she's like, I get it, like that's, but I don't have to run out the door for every trouble breathing call. I don't have to
Right.
run out the door, for those types of things. Um, so that's part of it. I think the other part of it is trying to, again, continually work and focus on the things that are important to me. My phone screen is picture of my two kids, right, from playing in the winter. So constant reminder to myself that when I look at my phone, those are, in addition to my wife, but my two kids, those are the most important things in my life. And being there for them, right? And you know, laying on the couch with them and, putting on, video on YouTube or whatever. If they want to watch the same, you know, episode of Paw Patrol, that like that's okay, we'll do that because that's what you want. Like being there for, to understand that there's life outside of it. Hopefully, once the weather breaks, being able to get back outside and fire up my Traeger, being able to use that a little bit more and,
Heck yeah, we're
kind of
gonna
get.
smoke some meats.
Well, I know you do a lot of it. I see your posts, but I
Yeah.
mean, I just, try to get back to like making meal prep for the week and, you know, trying different recipes, different, smoked chicken recipes and doing that kind of stuff. Um, the other stuff, photography, like trying to focus in on that and not make it fire department photography, make it something else, not focus just on fire trucks and firehouses. Like, go out and see some nature. Go to sporting events, baseball games, looking forward to, probably doing some more of that with the kids now as they're getting to that age of, being able to sit through a half of a baseball game or something like that. So,
Awesome. We've been going for over an hour here. I know you got some stuff that's coming up here. I just a final question I want to ask you.
mhm.
Like, what does the frontline mindset mean to you?
So I think it's twofold. I think there's, from an operational side of things, right? And I think there's, if you're somebody who is in this profession, paid volunteer, fire EMS, right? Both, it's that boots on the ground, you're riding an engine, riding on an ambulance, tower ladder, anything like that. Like you're actively engaged and doing those tactical things. I think the other side of it is that on the strategic side, it's the it's the changing of your mind, and understanding that not everything has to be focused solely tactically and solely fire department or emergency services related, but then also what other things are out there in life. Um, and then strategically, it's how do you lead from where you're at, right? And if
Mm,
if you're in a position, whether captain's position, chief's position, commissioner, whomever, like how do you provide and how do you lead the next generation, or how do you prepare the next generation to take over? Um, I think that's the other important part, because knowing that, like you said, at some point you're going to retire. At some point, I'm probably going to step away, right? And like when that happens, like have I prepared the next person to do that?
right.
So.
Well, Zach, I thank you. I mean, that was fantastic. I couldn't ask for a better closer. So,
Thanks.
um,
Thank you.
stick around for just a minute, but I'm going to take
Yeah.
us out of here. Where can people find you at?
So I have an Instagram page. It's First Line Leadership. It's not as active as it used to be, just with work, life, everything else, but I post some stuff there. There's a link in there, take you to a Substack that I started a little bit ago, just some longer thoughts, things that wouldn't necessarily fit on an Instagram post. So that's mainly it. There's some other links in there as well. But yeah, that's mainly where you'll find my thoughts and my writing and some pictures.
Awesome. Well, Zach, thank you for coming on this episode of Frontline Mindset of National Fire Radio. I appreciate you, brother. Captain Zach Polvino, Snyder Fire Department, upstate New York, the true upstate, by the way, just outside of Buffalo. He's out there doing great things. We will see you guys out there. Be careful. And as always, we'll see you on the next one. This is Rob, Frontline Mindset.
National Fire Radio.